Ever had to stand up to someone everyone else feared?
Before my sister cut the cake at her bridal shower, I caught my dad's eyes across the room. He gave me a look he's given me 100 times before, tight-lipped, weary, almost pleading. It was the kind of look he gave me when Mom found out about his drinking, or when Lindsay totaled her car in high school and he told me to say she swerved to avoid a dog. The kind of look that said, just let it go. Let it die in silence. But this time, the stakes felt like something bigger. He walked over, leaning in close enough that I could smell the bitterness of his black coffee breath and the faint cologne he only dusted on for family events. He said it softly, like a man who still thought he had control of the situation. Whatever you know, let it go. Don't ruin it for her. I remember staring at the cake, this absurdly decorated two-tiered thing with pink frosting roses and some cheesy plastic topper that said from Miss to Mrs. like it was AF *****ing promotion. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, and for a moment I convinced myself maybe he was right. Maybe I could just sit there, smile like everyone else, raise a glass of lukewarm champagne, and pretend I didn't know the groom was a liar. A manipulative, slick-talking liar. But before I could decide what to do, someone else made the choice for me. Danielle. Of course, it was Danielle. The maid of honor. The picture-perfect best friend who always dressed like she was going to be snapped by paparazzi outside a boutique, even when we were kids riding bikes in the driveway. She stood up, cleared her throat in that practiced, deliberate way that meant whatever she was about to say wasn't an accident. I watched her hand tighten around her mimosa flute, her voice steady but strained, as she looked directly at Lindsay and said, "There's something you all deserve to know about the groom." I swear you could hear the air shift. My mother's smile froze mid-sip. One of Lindsay's coworkers actually set her phone down, which I don't think I've ever seen her do, and somewhere in the room, the Bluetooth speaker looped back to the same Taylor Swift song for the third time in a row, like the universe itself was holding its breath. And, just like that, no one moved. Not even me. Danielle wasn't bluffing. She wasn't joking. This wasn't some cute anecdote about how Jake once got drunk at karaoke and sang Pony by Genuine. No. Her voice was sharp, controlled. She said, 2 years ago, I walked in on him with someone who wasn't Lindsay. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. I confronted him about it. He told me it wasn't my business and that if I valued my friendship with Lindsay, I'd keep my mouth shut. The room stayed silent for a full 10 seconds before Lindsay let out this breathy, confused little laugh, like she genuinely believed it had to be some kind of gag. You could see her scanning the faces of the people closest to her, looking for confirmation that this was a prank. But all she found were blank stares, people suddenly unsure where to place their eyes. That's when Jake stood up. He moved toward Danielle like he was walking on stage, putting on the charm he always kept in his back pocket for emergencies. His smile was just wide enough to look confident, but not cocky. He said, "Come on, Danielle. We all know you've never liked me. Let's not make Lindsay's day about old gossip. You're better than that." It was a good performance. Too good. He even touched Lindsay's shoulder, gently, like he was grounding her in reality. But I saw the flicker in Danielle's eyes. She wasn't backing down. She pulled out her phone, and for one sickening second I thought she was going to play a video or something, but instead she held up a photo, grainy, but clear enough. It showed Jake shirtless, in a kitchen that wasn't his, with a woman's hands around his waist, her face barely visible in the frame. And here's the thing, I recognized the tile on that backsplash. It belonged to Rachel, a girl he used to do business with when he worked at that short-lived startup that folded after 6 months. She was 22, barely legal to rent a car, and the last time I saw her she was bragging about how Jake took her to Catalina for her birthday. The room didn't explode. It sank. It collapsed inward like a black hole of fake smiles and boiling shame. Someone's aunt coughed. Mom stood up and sat down again. Lindsay stared at the photo, then at Jake, then at me. And all I could do was sit there and pretend I hadn't known. Because I did. I knew. I'd known since before the engagement. Since long before the ring, when Jake called me drunk, reckless, slurring apologies I never asked for, and told me the thing I've never repeated out loud, "It should have been you." He said it like it meant something. Like that could erase the fact that he was now marrying my baby sister. And yet, I still said nothing. Lindsay stood up slowly, eyes glazed over, her fingers gripping the back of her chair like it was the only solid thing in the room. Her voice was small, confused. "Danielle, why are you doing this now? Why didn't you tell me before?" Danielle blinked hard, her mouth parting slightly, and then, without looking at me, she said, "I wanted to. But I wasn't the only one who knew. I figured if her chin jerked in my direction, wasn't going to tell you, maybe you didn't need to hear it at all." That was the moment the whole room turned. Because now it wasn't just about Jake. Now it was about me. And I knew, I felt it in my spine, this was only the beginning. The silence after Danielle's accusation didn't shatter like glass, it bent like steel under slow pressure, groaning under the weight of years of pretending, of brushing things aside, of choosing comfort over truth. Lindsay stood there frozen, her mouth slightly open as if a response had started forming, but got lost somewhere between disbelief and humiliation. The room around her seemed suspended in place, champagne flutes halfway to lips, mothers clutching their pearls a little tighter, and that one cousin from Delaware already texting someone under the table. But all I could focus on was my sister's eyes, wide and desperate, looking for someone, anyone, to explain what the hell just happened. Jake, of course, was the first to move. His talent had always been recovery. He could spin a lie into something sweet, like sugar coating around arsenic, and he stepped forward with the careful confidence of a man who had been through this kind of storm before and learned to dance in the middle of it. His voice was smooth, laced with just enough surprise and wounded charm to make you feel like maybe he was the real victim here. He said, "I don't know what kind of grudge you're holding, Danielle, but this is messed up. You know this isn't true. You know I've always been good to Lindsay." There was a flicker then, a tiny twitch in Lindsay's expression. Not trust. Not quite doubt. Just a wrinkle in the perfect fabric, a stitch coming undone. She looked down at the photo Danielle was still holding out like a courtroom exhibit and quietly asked, "What is this?" Her voice cracked just enough to make my heart ache. Jake tried to answer, but Danielle cut him off. She said, "That was Rachel. 2 years ago. He was seeing her while dating your sister." I didn't say anything then because, honestly, I thought Aaron would. I thought someone who actually shared your blood might care enough to tell you the truth. And there it was again. That look, bouncing back to me, burning with betrayal and confusion. Everyone in that room had seen Lindsay worship the ground I walked on when we were kids. She followed me everywhere, tried to dress like me, talk like me, even cut her bangs when I did badly, but with full commitment. And here she was, blinking hard, trying to calculate how long I had been lying to her by omission. Jake stepped closer to Lindsay now, lowering his voice, making it just intimate enough for the crowd to start shifting uncomfortably. He said, "Baby, she's been jealous for years. You know that. Look at her. She's always had something against us." I felt my jaw tighten, because that was exactly the card I knew he'd play. The bitter older sister angle. The woman who's alone and too proud to say she's lonely, watching her younger, prettier, more agreeable sister get the fairy tale. It was an old trick, and it still worked in rooms like this. Before I could say anything, Danielle pulled out another photo, this one a screenshot. A text thread. Jake's name at the top. His words clear as day. "Don't tell anyone about us. She's not who I'm with now. You know that." Danielle added, calmly, like a prosecutor laying the final piece of evidence on the table, this was 3 months into their relationship. He wasn't even hiding it. Just assumed no one would care enough to stop him. A quiet gasp came from one of Lindsay's college friends. Mom looked like she was about to faint. And Dad, he just leaned back in his chair, hands folded tight, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his molars might crack. That was the thing about my father. He was a man built for silence. He believed in handling problems in the family, which usually meant pretending they didn't exist until they metastasized into something you could no longer cut out cleanly. I glanced at him, but he didn't meet my eyes. Not this time. Lindsay stepped away from Jake like he had suddenly started to stink. Her face was pale, her hands trembling just enough to make the crystal bracelet on her wrist shimmer like it was mocking her. She turned to Danielle and asked the question that should have come much earlier, Maybe even before the engagement, before the dress fittings, before the deposit on the goddamn venue. Why now? Why are you telling me this now? Danielle's answer was simple. Brutal. Because I found out he texted Aaron last week. And when she didn't tell you, I realized someone had to. The room spun for me. I wasn't surprised she knew. Danielle had always had a way of sniffing out the things people tried to bury. But I hadn't expected her to say it out loud, to force my silence into the spotlight like that. Lindsay's head turned toward me again, slower this time, more calculated. She didn't ask a question. She didn't need to. Her expression was enough, cold, broken, and begging for an explanation I wasn't sure I could give. And here's the thing. She didn't know the full story. Not even close. Jake and I? We had history. Not just casual, not just flirtation. Real, actual, slept together during spring break and he never called again kind of history. Back in college, when things were messy and stupid and everything felt like it would matter forever. And when he showed up again years later, all polished and smooth-talking, I didn't recognize him at first. It wasn't until he laughed, the same laugh he had when he was lying through his teeth about why he didn't show up for my birthday party freshman year, that it all clicked. And I should have told Lindsay then. I should have. But I didn't. Because she looked happy. Because for once, she wasn't just in my shadow, she was lit up from the inside, glowing with the belief that someone had chosen her first. But now the lie was crumbling. The cracks were spreading like spiderwebs through glass, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole thing shattered. Lindsay turned away from me without a word and muttered something under her breath too soft for anyone else to hear, but I caught it. You could have stopped this. She wasn't wrong. As she walked toward the back hallway, Jake started to follow, but Danielle stepped in front of him like a goddamn linebacker. I think you've said enough, she snapped, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in Jake's face. Danielle turned to me as everyone else watched in stunned silence. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut bone. If you won't tell her the rest, I will. She deserves to know everything. And right then, I realized something horrifying. She didn't know everything yet. Not even close. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels heavy, like a sealed room without windows or doors, the kind that presses in on your lungs and makes your pulse throb in your ears. That's the silence I found myself standing in after Danielle's final words, as though the whole bridal shower had been knocked off its axis and was now spinning slowly in some altered version of reality where everyone was just pretending to breathe and blink like normal while the air around us curdled. I watched Lindsay disappear down the hallway with that stiff-backed posture she always had when she was pretending she wasn't about to cry, and something inside me twisted so tight it felt like it might snap. I didn't follow her right away, maybe because I knew what she was going to ask and I didn't want to hear myself answer it, or maybe because part of me thought I could still wake up and undo all of it, rewind the tape to before Danielle stood up, before Jake smiled at me like the past didn't matter, before I let myself believe silence was kindness. But I did go after her, eventually, stepping past the stunned circle of friends and family who had begun murmuring like insects in tall grass, unsure whether to keep pretending or start choosing sides. The hallway was narrow, and I found her in the guest bathroom with the door cracked just enough for the light to pour through like a spotlight, her hand gripping the porcelain sink so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She didn't look up when I entered. She just asked, without any emotion in her voice, "Is it true?" And even though the words were simple, I knew what she really meant wasn't about that photo or those texts. What she meant was, did you know? And worse, how long did you let me believe this was real? I stood in the doorway, suddenly feeling like I was 10 years old again, the older sister who got blamed for everything and nothing at the same time, always tasked with keeping the peace because I was more mature, or more responsible, or just better at handling things, as if that ever meant anything except being handed the burden of pretending. I wanted to lie, just to make her stop looking at me like that, but the truth came out before I could stop it. "It's true," I said, and my voice broke somewhere in the middle. Danielle's telling the truth. But that's not even the worst of it. Lindsay's face didn't change. Not at first. But I saw the small shift in her eyes, the tiny narrowing that meant her world was starting to rearrange itself, pieces sliding out of place while she struggled to find something to hold on to. "Then tell me," she whispered, not looking at me, just staring into her own reflection like it might offer her some better version of herself, one that hadn't spent the last year planning a wedding to a man who never deserved her. "Tell me everything." I stepped in and closed the door gently behind me, sealing us off from the noise of the party that was no longer a party. I leaned against the wall because my legs didn't feel solid enough to keep me upright on their own. And I told her. I told her about college, about Jake, about how we met at a party the summer before sophomore year, how he seemed charming in that dangerous way that makes you think you're the one who'll change him. I told her about the weekend we spent together in Santa Barbara, how he ghosted me after, how I'd never really thought about him again until he walked into our family's 4th of July barbecue 6 years later, introduced as her new boyfriend. I told her how I said nothing because I thought maybe it didn't matter anymore. I told her how he called me last week. That was the part that broke her. When I said, "He left me a voicemail last Thursday," she finally turned to look at me, and her mouth tightened in that way it always did when she was trying not to scream. I repeated it, slowly this time, because I needed her to understand how wrong it was. "He called me. Drunk. Told me I should keep quiet. Said it would hurt you. Said it should have been me." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't slap me or collapse or start sobbing into my shoulder. Instead, she laughed, a hollow, raw sound that didn't come from joy but from the kind of stunned disbelief that sets in when you realize the people you trusted most saw the danger coming and decided to watch anyway. "So he cheated on me," she said, turning back to the mirror. "He used Danielle. Slept with that girl, Rachel. Lied to my face. And you had him first." I opened my mouth to object, but she cut me off with a look that silenced everything. "No, don't explain. Don't try to twist it. You knew what he was, and you let me fall in love with him. You let me get measured for a goddamn dress." It wasn't fair, but she wasn't wrong. That's the thing about these moments. They're never black and white, but the pain doesn't care about nuance. The pain wants a target. And right then, I was the one standing in the crosshairs. "I thought you were happy," I said finally, because it was the only thing I could hold on to, the only excuse I had left. "I thought if I told you, it would just break you." She shook her head slowly, like she'd aged 20 years in the span of 15 minutes. "No, Erin. You didn't protect me. You protected yourself from being the one who ruined the fantasy. That's not the same thing." She walked past me then, out the door and down the hall, her posture still impossibly straight but her eyes vacant, like she was walking through smoke and hoping it would turn back into air. And I stood there, alone in the soft yellow light of the bathroom, realizing that the worst part of betrayal isn't the lie, it's the moment the truth arrives too late to matter. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't say out loud just yet, was that Danielle wasn't done. That she had shown me something else after the party, something that changed the entire story, something I had kept hidden even now because I didn't know what to do with it. A voice recording. Jake's voice. Calm, calculated, confident. And the words? They weren't about love. They were about money. About leverage. About using Lindsay to get to our father. And if Danielle was right, and I knew, deep down, that she was, then Jake's lies weren't just personal. They were strategic. And my sister hadn't been his partner. She'd been his plan. And somehow, in all the wreckage, I had become part of it. There are moments in life when the air around you seems to thicken, not from smoke or weather or any tangible shift, but from the sheer weight of something about to be said, something irreversible, something that, once spoken, can never be taken back. Never crumpled up and hidden like a bad photograph in a family album. I had that feeling the next day, sitting across from Danielle in the coffee shop on 9th, the one with the sticky tables and stale cinnamon rolls that somehow made the place feel more honest than any boutique cafe ever could. She had called me that morning, calm and precise as always, with a tone so matter-of-fact it made my stomach twist before she even said why. She said, "You need to hear this. And don't come looking to defend him. Just listen." That was all. So I sat there, fingers clenched around a paper cup I hadn't taken a sip from, as she pulled out her phone and opened a voice memo app like she was about to show me directions or a shopping list. not detonate a bomb that would turn our family's carefully constructed wedding fantasy into scorched earth. She didn't say anything as she hit play, just watched me with those hawk eyes of hers, eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. And then I heard it. Jake's voice. Clear. Smooth. Familiar in all the worst ways. I don't care about the dress or the venue or her damn Pinterest boards. What matters is that her dad is still sitting on that zoning permit. Once I get him on board with the real estate plan, we move. She's a good girl. Sweet. She'll do whatever I ask, especially when she thinks it's about building a future together. Just keep the other thing quiet until the wedding. After that, no one's gonna care. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Because in those few seconds, every single thread I'd been clinging to, every excuse I'd made, every doubt I'd nursed about whether this was all just a tangled misunderstanding, unraveled completely. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about mistakes or human weakness or any of the things people tell themselves in order to forgive the unforgivable. This was about leverage. Strategy. Cold calculation. Jake hadn't stumbled into love with my sister. He had selected her, like a player choosing a piece on a game board, because she gave him proximity to something he wanted, something he thought he could take without anyone noticing. I looked up at Danielle, who said nothing at first, just stared at me like she was waiting for a confession or an apology, or maybe just some acknowledgement that we'd both been right to suspect the rot long before it started seeping through the walls. Finally, I whispered, because my voice wouldn't come out any other way, "Where did you get that?" She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms like a woman who'd seen enough gaslighting to build a fortress against it. "I told you," she said, "I never liked him. And he never liked me either. Got careless. Left a backup of his voicemails on a shared iCloud account. He's not as smart as he thinks he is." I sat there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes, trying to figure out whether this was the moment I walked out and finally told Lindsay everything, the whole brutal, hideous truth, or whether, once again, I would convince myself that sparing her pain was more important than showing her the knife already embedded in her back. But deep down, I knew the choice had already been made the moment I heard that recording. The problem was, I wasn't the only one who had made it. Because when I got home, Mom was waiting in the kitchen, her arms folded across her chest, her mouth tight like she'd bitten down on something bitter. She didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was or whether I'd eaten. She just said, "Danielle sent it to me too." And then, after a long pause that felt more like an accusation than a statement, she added, "And I'm guessing she sent it to your father." I wanted to ask how she knew, how she could be so sure, but I didn't have to. The signs were there, the stack of legal documents on the kitchen counter, the construction blueprints Dad had been poring over for weeks, the tension in the air like a wire stretched too tight. Dad had been planning a major commercial development in North Ridge, a risky project with a zoning battle he hadn't told the rest of the family about in detail, but I'd seen enough scraps of paperwork to know Jake's involvement wasn't just coincidental. He had pitched himself as a middleman, a charming connection to new money investors, and Dad, ever the prideful businessman, had probably convinced himself that involving Jake wasn't personal, it was just smart. But now, with that recording floating around, it wasn't just about a ruined engagement. It was about liability, reputation, legal risk. If Jake had implied, even indirectly, that my father's cooperation was a condition of marriage, that could mean lawsuits, blackmail, scandal. Things our family had spent decades carefully dodging under the guise of private matters and handled internally. Mom looked at me, her eyes hollow in a way I hadn't seen since Grandma died. "We knew something was off. But you let it go too far. And now..." I cut her off before she could finish the sentence that was meant to sting. "Don't put this on me," I snapped, louder than I intended. "You knew. You saw the signs. You let her walk down the aisle in your head before the ring even fit. You wanted the illusion more than the reality." That stopped her cold. She didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't even flinch. Just nodded slowly and said, "Then fix it. Before it's too late." Too late. I wondered what that even meant anymore. That evening, as if on cue, Lindsay reappeared at the house like a ghost, her makeup still perfectly done, her dress ironed without a wrinkle, but her eyes completely empty. She sat at the kitchen table without asking for coffee, without asking about the voicemail, without saying a single word about Jake. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out the cake topper from the shower, the one that said "From Miss to Mrs.," and placed it gently on the table like an offering. Then, in a voice so even it scared me, she said, "We're still doing the rehearsal dinner. I don't want to cancel anything yet. But when I cut the cake this time, no one says a word. Not you, not Danielle, not Dad. I'll handle it." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. But I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that whatever grief she had been drowning in had burned off and left something else behind, something sharper, harder, colder. She wasn't asking for our silence. She was warning us. This wasn't a collapse. It was a setup. And I had no idea what she was planning. There was a stillness to that day that felt entirely unnatural, as if the universe itself had chosen to hold its breath, unsure whether to witness or interfere with what was about to unfold. And while the sun shone in its usual indifferent way and the world around us marched on in blissful ignorance, our family was about to step into the kind of moment that splits everything cleanly into before and after, where one single event becomes a permanent dividing line in the timeline of your life. The rehearsal dinner wasn't supposed to feel like a funeral, but it did, not in the weeping and flowers sense, but in that quiet, creeping dread that settles into your bones when everyone around you is pretending not to see the coffin right there in the middle of the room. It was held at a charming lakeside inn, the kind of place where newlyweds usually take smiling photographs on wooden docks under paper lanterns, and where old couples, still holding hands after decades, sip wine and pretend they never fought over burnt toast or unpaid bills. But that evening, it was a stage for something else entirely, something none of us could name out loud, but all of us could feel, pressing against our spines like a hidden blade. Lindsay, dressed in a pale blue dress that made her look both angelic and untouchable, arrived with the kind of serene expression that could either mean peace or devastation, and even now I'm not sure which version of her walked through those doors. Jake, oblivious or pretending to be, God only knows at this point, was playing the role of the charismatic, almost husband to perfection, shaking hands, cracking jokes with the groomsmen, making eye contact with the servers like he remembered their names from the tasting months before. He leaned in to kiss Lindsay on the cheek when she arrived, and she allowed it without a flicker of hesitation, which, in retrospect, was the most terrifying thing she could have done. That level of calm doesn't come from forgiveness or naivety. It comes from certainty, the kind that's cold and surgical, the kind that means you're not reacting because you've already decided how it ends. Dinner was served, and everyone went through the motions, the clinking of silverware, the polite laughter, the half-hearted toasts that no one would remember. I barely tasted my food, not because it was bad, but because every bite felt like trying to swallow stones while waiting for the sky to fall. Danielle sat across from me, her posture stiff and unreadable, her phone resting beside her plate like a loaded weapon, and every time Jake leaned in to whisper something in Lindsay's ear, I saw the tension in her jaw twitch ever so slightly. Our parents, meanwhile, wore their Sunday smiles, the kind reserved for church picnics and funerals, offering up little platitudes and filling silences with stories that didn't need to be told. Then came the cake. It was smaller than the one from the bridal shower, but no less ornate, decorated with pale blue frosting and silver accents that shimmered under the lights like they were mocking all of us. A quiet hush fell over the room as Lindsay stood and picked up the cake knife, her fingers graceful and precise, her expression utterly unreadable. She cleared her throat gently, so gently it was almost tender, and raised her glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she said, her voice carrying just enough to command the room, but not so much that it felt performative. "I know this hasn't been the easiest week for some of you. I know there have been questions, doubts, maybe even regrets. But tonight is about love, and family, and truth." The last word hung in the air like smoke, and I could feel Danielle's gaze snap toward her, sharp and alert, ready for anything. Jake, meanwhile, gave Lindsay a small smile and reached for her free hand, but she didn't take it. Instead, she stepped slightly away, raising her glass higher. I've always believed, she continued, that truth is a gift, not a punishment. That even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, it gives us the chance to see clearly, to start again, to choose better. She turned then, slowly, to face Jake. Her voice never rose, never cracked, never wavered. I loved you, she said simply. I really did. And I believed you were the person I saw when you held my hand in the dark or told me stories about your childhood or asked me about the names of our future kids. But it turns out, you weren't just lying to me. You were using me. There it was. The collective inhale of a room teetering on the edge of chaos, the soft gasp from someone in the back, the subtle clink of a glass being set down too quickly. Jake's face shifted, not dramatically, not with shock or rage or even guilt, but with that careful, practiced panic of a man who realizes too late that the play has changed and he's no longer holding the script. Lindsay, still calm, gestured toward the cake with the knife in hand. I thought I'd be cutting this cake as a bride, she said, almost smiling. But I think it's better this way. Then, looking him square in the eyes, she added, there won't be a wedding. Not next week. Not ever. And just so we're clear, yes, I heard the recording. And yes, I sent it to the people who need to hear it. Including Dad. Including the investors. Including the zoning board. Jake took a step toward her, his mouth opening to say something, probably to deny, to deflect, to deliver one of those desperate, half-sincere apologies that men like him keep in reserve for moments like these. But Lindsay cut him off with a single sentence that hit like a brick through stained glass. You can keep the ring, she said. You'll need it when you pawn it to pay your lawyer. The silence that followed was not passive. It was alive. It breathed, it expanded, it consumed. Jake stood there, stunned and stripped of his rehearsed charm, while Lindsay turned and walked away from the table, the knife still in her hand, but not raised in anger, only carried like proof of what she'd done, what she'd survived. Danielle followed her out, wordless, her steps steady and full of purpose. And I stayed behind. Jake looked at me then, that look of betrayal painted across his face like I owed him something, like I had picked the wrong side. I rose slowly, walked past him, and, before stepping outside, I turned back just once. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him with a look and a single line I had rehearsed in my head for years without even realizing it. Oh, and Aaron's the one you should have worried about. His eyes widened, but I didn't let him speak. Because he didn't know. He didn't know that I had made copies. Of everything. The tape. The texts. The legal notes. The backup contacts. Every scrap of his lies preserved in multiple folders with passwords only I knew. And maybe someday I'll send them all to someone who can use them. Or maybe I won't. Maybe, just maybe, the truth isn't about exposing everything to the world. It's about choosing exactly when and where it will hurt the most. And Jake? He has no idea when that will be.